like, didn't sign up for this.
Can you give it another minute as we still have a number of pings coming in? Of course, I say that as it stops. Okay, so we can go ahead and get started. As a friendly reminder, we would ask that you please mute yourself if you're not speaking. Also, particularly when we're online, if you could identify yourself and organization before you speak, that would be helpful. If you're on the phone and logged in via the web, if you could turn off your computer speakers, that'll minimize any background noise. And I see that our general counsel has already entered into the chat that the session is being recorded, and by participating in the session, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and use of this session. So with that, I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order, and we'll get started with the roll. Cheryl Kashuba.
Good afternoon, I'm here.
Good afternoon. Secretary Bogan. I think represented by Siri Reddy. Oh, I'm sorry, Doctor.
No, I am here for part of the meeting, and then I will be on and off. So Siri Reddy will be, if I'm not here, has my form to vote on my behalf. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Joel Hopkins.
Present.
Antoinette Kraus.
Present.
Amy Lowenstein.
I'm here. Hi.
Ellen Gallardi.
Present.
Dr. Venkat.
Here.
Secretary Arkush, note represented by Alexis Dysonroth.
I'm here.
Very good. Colleen Cavanaugh. No Colleen. Okay. And Tia Whitaker.
I'm here.
All right, very good. And we'll keep an eye out for Colleen, and we will move right along to take a look at the minutes that have been shared with you. Would look for a motion to adopt the minutes of our February 19th meeting of the board.
This is Tia. I so move.
I heard
I'll
Tia
second.
move. Who seconded?
Antoinette.
Antoinette seconds. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Motion carries. At this point in the meeting, as we typically kick these off, we note that public participation is permitted as required by the Sunshine Act, and to ensure the orderly progress of today's meeting, we ask that comments be directed to the chair and should be limited to no more than 3 minutes. We may or may not address those comments during the meeting. I will open it up for any public comment and would ask you to raise your hand so I could see. Seeing no hands, hearing no voices, we will move right along. Devin, we're going to move right into an executive director's report.
All right, great. Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon. So I'm going to start off with some key updates here that will really shape much of our discussion today. We have continued to track and monitor enrollment and particularly disenrollments that we have been seeing, particularly as the non-paid terminations have been processed in the last month or so. We continue to communicate impacts about affordability to policymakers and stakeholders. We continue to get a lot of interest and questions on the impact of the expiration of the enhanced premium tax credits. As we talked about in the February meeting, we are maintaining focus on 2 key strategic priorities. The first is starting the implementation of the in-house call center. that would be launching next January 1st, 2028. And we also have been implementing HR1 policies. Those are new federal changes that were passed as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill last year. Some of those changes are coming up this open enrollment and additional ones next year. There are two changes that have really emerged over the past couple of months since our last meeting that we'll be spending some more time on today. One is that an enrollment issue has emerged related to fraudulent enrollments, and that has really required a significant shift in attention to that issue to make sure that we can ensure program integrity. And we also have seen an unexpected change in the reinsurance budget, so we'll be talking about our budget quite a bit as well today. For the legislative and federal updates, in the first quarter, we have been providing information, again, have seen a lot of questions and interest in understanding what the enrollment numbers look like from a range of state and federal policymakers and stakeholders. So we do keep that information updated and share that as we get questions about the impact of the enhanced premium tax credits. On the regulatory note, wanted to mention that we continue to wait for the proposed rule to be finalized. That was one that we commented on earlier this year. Not a lot that would directly impact Pennie operations immediately, but just looking for that certainty for the broader market. As we noted when we discussed that proposed rule, we had been disappointed not to see CMS provide regulations on pre-enrollment verification. That's one of those key federal changes for next year. We continue to not see any proposed regulations on that. We had put in our comment letter that we were hoping to see final regulations by July, but we are hearing that we may not even get proposed regulations until the end of the summer or early fall, meaning that potentially final regulations would not be out until the very end of the year. We do not feel like we can wait that long to start implementing these pretty significant new policies. So we have started that work in earnest, and just highlighting that there, is a risk there that we might have to make some midstream adjustments as those regulations come out federally. We have been having conversations and communicating how important we feel it is to have those regulations as soon as possible to CMS. So wanted to share some data as we have continued to watch enrollment throughout the past couple of months since open enrollment. In February, we talked a lot about where we landed at the end of open enrollment on January 31st. That's that 486 number right there, kind of comparing that to our peak open enrollment number, which was last year, the 496. Currently, as of this morning, we are at about 447,000. So we have dipped below that 450,000 mark. This puts us about a year and a half back on enrollment, back to where we were about 18 months ago, and about 10% down from that 497 peak. As of today, we have seen 156,000 Pennsylvanians who were enrolled through Pennie in 2025, who are no longer enrolled in Pennie as of today. We do continue to keep our website updated. That's pennie.com/affordability. Again, we continue to get questions regularly, so we try to update that every 10th of the month with the previous month's data. So you can continue to look at that. We have a lot of information on there about the disenrollment trends that we're seeing. There were a few data questions last time, and we brought a few follow-ups here. First, just wanted to mention that we continue to see really consistent trends in those who are dropping coverage. It tends to be people who are in that older age range, and as a reminder, they tend to be more likely to have lost APTC altogether because they were above that income threshold. So we saw the greatest cost increases for that 55 to 64-year-old group. Consistent with what we saw during open enrollment, the next highest income range is that 26 to 34-year-old group, followed by 35 to 44. So we continue to see pretty consistent patterns in who is dropping coverage. On the income side, also pretty consistent, really focused on the 138 to 200% FPL range, that, or 250%. That range is really where we see the bulk of people dropping coverage. As we've talked about before, that also, the state affordability program that's already been outlined in code really would, target that same income range if it was funded. But wanted to highlight that we continue to see the highest disenrollments there, which we see in just the very high price sensitivity of those lower income populations. This is a map of showing just total disenrollments by county. These are people who have drop coverage by county. On our website, thepenney.com/affordability, we do have a more interactive map that shows disenrollments and that as a percent of enrollment. And what we do see there versus this sort of net overall picture is that a lot of the central and eastern central counties are, as a proportion of their enrollment, seeing much higher disenrollments, again, on that proportionate basis. A couple other follow-ups from questions we received in the February meeting. We were asked to look at how disenrollments change by metal level. So this chart is showing that we are seeing more people drop coverage who are in the bronze or silver levels of coverage versus gold, which is proportionate, seeing fewer people drop coverage. I think this is generally in line with what we would expect. We know that the silver level of coverage tends to be a lot of people who are CSR eligible, again, putting them at those lower income levels consistent with the data on the previous slide. On the bronze side, we did see a large shift of people to bronze this year, and anecdotally heard a lot of concern from people who were making that change about deductibles being higher, but we heard a lot from them about just wanting to hang on to any type of coverage. So we are seeing populations who are enrolled in bronze and silver dropping at higher rates than those who enrolled in gold. We were also asked to look at how non-payment of premiums compared to prior years. So this is not the full 156,000 population that has dropped coverage since 2025. This is just the non-paid terms. So we did compare that to the last 2 years. This year, that number is about 55,000. In 2024, it was about half that. And the 55,000 is about 60% more than last year. So we really did see a marked increase in the non-paid terminations, which is, again, in line with what we were expecting, but the numbers do bear out those affordability concerns across the board. So that data really looks at what we saw during open enrollment, what we've been seeing up to this point. We also wanted to give this view of what we are looking at for 2027 coverage. So the main change going into this next open enrollment period, besides the open enrollment dates themselves, is that many people who have lawfully present immigration statuses will no longer qualify for APTC, for financial help. There are some categories who still will qualify, but about 28,000 of our enrollees will no longer qualify for financial help. So we wanted to look at how we might anticipate those populations would be impacted for purposes of trying to figure out how many might drop coverage or remain covered. This shows an income breakout of that population, showing that the vast majority, nearly all, are at some of the lowest incomes that we enroll. So given that, I mean, if we're looking at 100 to 200% FPL, that's $15,000 to $30,000 of income. When you take the average premium, you're really looking at people paying half of their income or a third of their income at the higher income ranges just towards premiums alone. So we are anticipating that most of that 28,000 will not be able to afford full price coverage next year and will likely become uninsured. So I wanted to share that data for the forward-looking anticipation of enrollment. Yes, Amy.
If you want me to say this for later, I can, but I had some questions about the outreach to that population. We can talk about later or now.
Oh, no, that would be a great time.
Okay, so this is something that the Department of Human Services is facing. Sorry, this is Amy Lowenstein from the Health Law Project. So this change in immigration status eligibility, DHS is dealing with it as well. They're dealing with it a little earlier. It comes into play on October 1st for Medicaid. So I had a few questions. One is Pennie, what work is being done to sort of verify that Pennie has the correct immigration status information, both with maybe the federal government, but also with the individuals, like outreach to confirm? And what kind of notice are people going to get short of there's going to obviously be a termination notice if somebody is determined not eligible, but is there going to be any kind of warning before? There are some people, it could take them a while, who might have pathways to becoming, eligible in a different immigration category. Not everybody is going to have that. And then I had another question about the sort of gap between October 1st when people lose Medicaid and when people could be on Pennie for 3 months, but I can save that for after the first question.
Sure. So we used the current information that we had provided on the application about the immigration status to come to that 28,000 number. And that data is also confirmed. We check all the lawfully present immigration status data against the Department of Homeland Security as part of our immediate live checks whenever someone submits an application. So we did use the information provided to us, and that has been confirmed on the current applications. I mean, I think certainly if any of those applications those statuses have changed, there would be an opportunity for anyone to update that. That would be also confirmed by Homeland Security before continuing to be eligible.
Kevin,
So
did you
there's
want
not
to speak to the outreach piece of her question?
Yes, so on outreach, we were planning to communicate kind of in a more similar to what we did with the 5-year bar population that lost eligibility this past year. That was a smaller population. But typically we try to send multiple communications through multiple channels to highlight the change and explain what is happening to their coverage and what their options might be, which in this case would be full price coverage or finding coverage elsewhere. I think we all kind of know that there are not a ton of other options, but just doing our best to explain what's happening and what they can do, either to update their application with any new information they have, and look at their options at full price if they do lose eligibility.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the update, the application. Can Pennie, since this information could be sort of old, can Pennie run those folks against the federal database again to see if something has changed to sort of trim down that group so that folks who could be eligible might not be caught up in this?
Yeah, we do. That's it. I'll have to check on that, but I think we can look at if we think there's any way to narrow down that list of where we think there might have been an update that is not reflected in the application, doing special outreach to that group, I think is what I hear you saying. And so I think we can look at whether the information we get from DHS would allow us to do that.
Yeah, and I guess, well, I mean, you mean Homeland Security, DHS, right?
Sorry, yes.
Yes.
The other DHS,
yeah.
US DHS.
So yeah, I was kind of proposing two things, one, checking checking what they have so you have the most current information, and then for those who remain outreaching specifically to say, this is what we have, these are the only eligibility categories. If you have an update, please let us know. So it's very targeted. That was what I was proposing. And then can I just quickly follow up on that question about the State Department of Human Services? So there's going to be this gap where there are going to be some people who will lose Medicaid, but there are 3 months when they could be on Pennie. May not be a huge amount. Have there been conversations with the Department of Human Services about transitioning those folks over? If someone might have a surgery scheduled, it could be really valuable to get those extra 3 months of coverage through Pennie.
I don't know the exact answer to that question. And Rob, if you want to add in at all on that one, I know we have been meeting with DHS regularly on the changes that are happening to Medicaid and what we can do on our end. We already have a lot of sort of transition systems in place thanks to the unwinding. We did a lot to streamline those coverage transitions, but we have been in regular meetings with PA DHS on all the changes happening at Medicaid and what we can do for people who are eligible to get coverage through Pennie. Rob, anything to add there?
Yeah, so we should continue to get the account transfer process as usual for that period of time. But Amy, I think it's a great point that we could work with DHS to see if there's anything further we could do in terms of trying to communicate to them to get them over to us for that last quarter of 2026. So we'll put that as an action item, and we'll reach out to our friends at DHS to see if there's anything we could do.
Great, thank you. Thanks.
Can somebody
Colleen,
just
go ahead.
clarify? Sorry, it's Colleen. Can somebody clarify that 3 months? Would they then if they pay, would they retain coverage in Pennie going forward? This is just to make sure that we capture them at the moment they lose coverage. I just was concerned with the reference of just trying to capture membership for 3 months. Is the goal would be we would capture that membership and retain it longer term? Or why was there a reference to 3 months?
Well, the 3 months, I mean, if somebody can't afford, like, they're not gonna be able to afford to pay,
Yeah,
pay for
they're
Pennie without
eligible
tax
for tax
credits.
credits for the
Yeah.
last 3 months
Right.
of this year.
Right,
Then they would roll off, is I think the 3 months she was talking about.
yeah.
They wouldn't get tax credits starting 1/1 of 27. But they would otherwise be eligible for coverage like anyone else that lost coverage in September of 26.
Yeah.
Devin, did you have a thought on when outreach could take place to let that population know that they should update their applications or update their information? Is that maybe something in the summer?
Yeah, I mean, what we've taken from lessons learned of when we've communicated big changes to consumers is that starting midsummer, or, mid to late summer into the fall does allow us to do multiple rounds of communication to try to make sure that that message gets through. So I think we would apply those same lessons learned to this population as well. And I think depending on what we can find about whether any information from Homeland Security would allow us to communicate earlier or something more specific about needing, current enrollees, having them come in to update their status. If we find any more tailored information that we can use for that purpose, I think we would do that as soon as we have it.
Okay. Colleen, back to you.
Sorry. Do we have regional data on this to understand the 28,000 by rating region, like what the volume is?
So we do not have it at that granular of a level. I could double check to see if we can. So the difficulty that we have is we have to reach out to our vendor to get this data because it's a more secure source of information that's not stored on our regular eligibility enrollment platform. So what we do is we get kind of the return code from the Department of Homeland Security that prompts it. So I could see if we could do a data join to try to get those folks as like what their actual address is, their residential address. Can't guarantee it, but we could look into it.
Would be helpful because obviously there's a risk to carriers if we have people jumping on for the last 3 months of the year to get whatever health care that they can, which ultimately will affect Pennie from a reinsurance perspective. Right. So that's just to be helpful to understand so people can plan and understand what potential utilization might be coming their way.
Yeah, so we will look, oh, sorry, because I was gonna say, we'll look into that and just to clarify as well, I mean, they do have the right to, it's a SEP is created, right, when they lose the Medicaid access. So we do want to make sure that they're apprised of that benefit or that right that they would have with Pennie coverage.
Yep.
And just to also make an important distinction, this slide here, this 28,000, these are currently enrolled Pennie enrollees that we are expecting to likely drop coverage for 2027 because they lose eligibility. I don't know the volume that we would potentially expect for that reference to the October 1st.
On the Medicaid side.
Yeah, we haven't looked into that enough to have an estimate of that population. This 28,000 specifically already enrolled, and many of them have been enrolled for a while with Pennie.
Gotcha. Yep. So this still would be helpful to understand at the at a more granular level, because obviously that will impact, membership for all of us.
Yeah. Devin, did you have more slides or do you want to open it up for other questions?
Yeah, this wraps up the data slide. So if there's any other questions on any of the other pieces of information shared here, can talk through those at this time.
Seeing any hands, but that means we turn to the budget recap with Heather, right?
Yep, that's right.
All right, thanks everyone. Good afternoon. I'd like to walk you through our current financial position, recap our 2025 performance, as well as share some key updates from the first quarter of 2026. So looking at our overall financial status, I'm going to start with the big picture. We closed out 2025 in a very strong financial position. Our revenue exceeded our expectations across the board, and our disciplined approach to managing expenses helped us maintain a solid year-end outcome. And at the start of 2026, revenue continued to look solid. Even though enrollment has been lower, premium increases have helped keep the gross premium strong. With that being said, we do expect some changes ahead. We anticipate a decline in revenue beginning in the second quarter, driven by the processing of the non-payment terminations and decrease in enrollment. Despite these expected shifts, our updated multi-year projections indicate that the organization remains financially resilient, supported by our sufficient reserves to manage any future uncertainties. Next slide. All right, so jumping in to the 2025 recap, I hope you had some time to review this information in the pre-reads, but I am going to go ahead and provide some very important highlights. So we generated higher than anticipated revenue across all revenue categories. As we talked about through the year last year, our expenses came in below budget, and that's thanks in part to our operational discipline, as well as some vacancies. While the reinsurance costs were slightly above the original expectations, savings in other areas helped to offset that increase. And most importantly, we ended the year with a strong net position, which strengthens our ability to navigate future challenges. In addition, we continue to maintain the $75 million operational reserve, ensuring we can support our ongoing program needs. And then next slide. So taking a look at the first quarter of 2026, while our revenues appear strong, that's partly due to timing. Non-payment terminations were processed later on in April, which temporarily boosted our Q1 numbers. As those credits are applied and the enrollment declines, we expect lower revenues in upcoming quarters, which will be reflected in some future slides. And then on the expense side, we continue to benefit from operational efficiencies and staffing vacancies, which again are keeping our costs under budget. At the same time, we're making strategic staffing investments. We're actively hiring and converting contractors into full-time employees. These steps are designed to strengthen our operational capacity and prepare us for the upcoming call center implementation. To wrap everything up, while we anticipate some revenue softening in the coming quarters, our overall financial position remains strong and stable. Our reserves, our disciplined operations, and our strategic staffing efforts position us well to continue supporting the program and meeting the needs of our customers. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Heather? Ellen, go ahead.
Hi, Heather. I was just wondering, have you guys looked to see, is there a tipping point that if the enrollment dipped below a certain level, that you would start to have concerns about that budget? Like, is there a level of expense that starts to become unsustainable, and just trying to get a sense of the magnitude of risk? If enrollment drops by 10,000, 20,000, is there a point that you would feel more concerned about that?
I don't know if we have an exact number. Devin, what are your thoughts on that?
I think we've modeled a lot of different enrollment numbers, and in the very worst case scenarios where we're dipping below 300,000, that starts getting much tighter. I think we have also at the same time made changes to allow us to have more levers to pull on the operational expenses. For example, bringing the call center in-house will allow us to more quickly adjust our costs as needed, which those costs would also go down with lower enrollment. So, but at this point, none of our enrollment forecasts anticipate us going that low on enrollment. So I think that, and that's not a hard and fast tipping point. I think that's just when we started doing really worst case scenario situations last year, that was when things started looking really tough. And again, there are so many factors, as we'll talk about in the next couple of slides, that there might be other scenarios even above that amount of enrollment where we still start tightening up because of other factors. But just on enrollment alone, kind of setting other variability aside, that's generally, I think, where things would start getting a lot tougher. Not to say there wouldn't have to be adjustments or pullbacks, even at higher numbers of enrollment.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Devin. Other questions for Heather? All right, I think that winds down the quote unquote easy part of the agenda. So let's roll right into reinsurance.
We'll do that. I'm actually going to go back one slide. We did want to just give an update on a transition we're trying to make with the budget. So this will just take a second. Heather, I think, or actually Kristen will walk through this.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to share from an admin standpoint that we are implementing a transition from our current dual budgeting structure of calendar year and state fiscal year to a single state fiscal year budgeting model. There are 4 clear benefits to the organization for this transition. Number 1, alignment with Commonwealth accounting and reporting systems. Number 2, improved financial accuracy. It'll eliminate timing mismatches associated with maintaining 2 overlapping fiscal calendars. Number 3, reduced administrative burden. A single state fiscal year budget streamlines internal processes. And number 4, clearer, more consistent reporting. To complete the shift to a July 1 to June 30 fiscal cycle, we will introduce a one-time 6-month GAAP budget covering January 1, 2027 through June 30, 2027. This bridge period allows us to begin the next full state fiscal year cycle on July 1, 2027 through June 30, 2028. So at the upcoming August board meeting, we'll present 2 budgets for approval. First, the 6-month GAAP budget, again covering 1/1/27 through 6/30/27. And then second, the full state fiscal year budget from July 1, 27 through 6/30/28. Both budgets will be provided in advance with clear summaries and explanations of any changes as usual. And that's what we're gonna try to do here and line everything up. So if there's any questions on the transition, we'd be happy to answer.
Joel?
For the state fiscal year 7/27 to 6/28, if you're seeking approval for that at the August meeting, that's awfully far in advance. And I think really my question is that too far in advance to present a budget essentially a year out?
Kristen, you want me to take this?
Sure.
So Joel, how it typically works is we have to have the state fiscal year budget submitted in October over to the governor's office. So we were thinking the August meeting, since that's our closest meeting prior to when the required submission needs to be in.
Thank you. That makes sense.
Could we potentially add like an October meeting that would focus just on kind of final budgets? And maybe that's a future issue, maybe it's a now issue, but to give at least a couple more months of development before getting into that.
We do have an October meeting already, so I think what we would likely want to do is get that approval in August, because we are already doing most of the work on this timeline anyway.
Yeah.
And we're really just trying to align so we're not doing double work. And then maybe any adjustments that we have with any additional information, if we have that, we could adjust at that October meeting right before we do the final submission on the state side process. So we could leave that as sort of a adjustment period if needed, with the main conversation happening in August.
Just in case something develops over the next couple months. I think that makes sense. Joel, does that make sense?
It does, having that flexibility to look at it, closer to actual submission makes sense to me.
Other questions for Kristen or Heather? All right, now we move on.
Okay, so that really sets us up well to talk about reinsurance and the higher costs that have come in this year. So we'll talk about the higher costs, but also talk about our current long-term projections on our budget to provide context for the higher payment for reinsurance this year. So just as a quick reminder, there is a 2-year lag in reinsurance. When Pennie says this is what we think we can contribute to reinsurance in the next coverage year, the insurance department uses that to set parameters, insurers use that to set rates. The coverage year happens, all the claims come in, and then by the time Pennie makes the payment, it's 2 years from that original date when the budget was determined. So just mentioning that because that 2-year lag does present some challenges when we do see changes. It creates a delay in the ability to react to changes that we're seeing. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more for what that might mean moving forward. But the gist for this year is that for the 2025 coverage year, the final claims that came through, and those really were being finalized throughout April and early May, were much higher than what we had budgeted. We had budgeted $50.4 million for the 2025 coverage year that we would pay out in this July. Based on the final tallying of the claims, there's an additional $31 million in claims costs that were eligible for reinsurance, and thus the total budget request of Pennie to support reinsurance is $81.4 million, again, to be paid in this July for the 2025 coverage year. Just a couple of other notes about historically the cost with reinsurance. We have seen a wide range in this program. In the first few years, we were actually collectively $26.6 million under budget. We were slightly over budget last year. This is the first time that we have seen a multi-digit increase of the $31 million. So the request and conversation for today is really to pay the $81.4 million total. So before we get to the more discussion on that and the vote on that, I wanted to provide broader context for what our budget looks like over the coming years to show how the $31 million would really play out over the coming years. So on the next slide, I have a couple of key points underscoring, what Heather mentioned, that revenues initially are higher, but actually our projected revenues for this year in general are higher than what we had anticipated in our worst case scenario projections last year for a couple of reasons. One is that we did see more new enrollment than we were anticipating that backfilled a lot of the coverage that was dropped. And also with the rate increases being where they are, that also means that we are getting more user fee per enrollee. We talked about some of the coverage changes that are projected. And I do want to note before we get into the actual numbers that the scope of the policy and price changes, especially the cost increases for consumers, these policy changes from the federal level, they don't really have a parallel in this program up to this point. So we have done our best guess based on what we have seen over the past 6 months that was really instructive into consumer behavior with high cost increases, to really play that out over what we think will happen over the coming years. We do want to note that we have previously talked about a $75 million emergency fund. And, as we talk about the out years, I think the volatility that we've seen in enrollment, in revenues, and in reinsurance just really underscore the need for us to keep that preserved as an emergency fund. But as Heather mentioned, even with conservative estimates, we do see a strong path forward to maintain budget sustainability, even with enrollment declines. Really making sure that we're keeping an eye on reinsurance, which we'll talk about that and the other levers that we have on our expense side. So I'll take a couple of minutes to walk through this slide, because I think this will be what we continue to build on over the coming years. And again, a lot of projections in here, a lot of assumptions, a lot of things that can change these numbers. Across the top, we have the years and we have the estimated average enrollment. So for example, we are projecting our average enrollment for 2026 to be 442,000. Right now, we're sitting at about 447. And again, this is not the open enrollment number. This assumes monthly declines such that over the entire year, the average is 442, higher in the first half, lower in the second half. So we are looking to be on track with that average. We have the estimated net position that Heather mentioned coming out of 2025 at 131 million. Then we have the fixed emergency reserve, and we are going to kind of set that aside for now. That really maintains across all of these years as an untouched reserve. So just kind of keep that off to the side for a moment. Our user fee projection for the 2026 is about 119 million. Again, that is higher than what we had projected in our worst case scenario because we had more new enrollment and the rates were higher than we had anticipated. Coming down to operations, again, still in 2026, we had the 70.8, which was the approved budget. Our previously approved 50.4 million for reinsurance, the overrun for reinsurance this year, which is the 31 million. And when you look at that total, it does mean that we would run this year at a $9 million operating deficit. However, if you take the 131 million and you set aside the 75 million, that leaves us with about 54 million. So we are still of sort of non-emergency reserve funds. So that would bring that down to 47 million at the end of this year. Again, still retaining a pretty solid usable reserve amount. And as you play that out across the years, if you look at first the enrollment numbers across 27 to 29, for 2027, we're projecting that enrollment will stay about even, except for those 28,000 individuals who are going to lose tax credits, have to pay full price, and will likely no longer be enrolled through Pennie. But otherwise, we are assuming relatively similar enrollment minus the 28,000. For 2028 and beyond, 2028 is the first year that other federal requirements related to pre-enrollment verification, and again, that's where people have to come in and actively confirm information. We assume about a 10% drop from that provision, and then kind of evening out moving forward. When you look at the user fees that would be tied to those enrollment drops, we kind of see those here going down to about 105 million. I do want to note that we have pretty conservative rate increase estimates here. So these are assuming about a 3 to 4% annual rate increase. Again, if that's higher, those amounts would be higher. If that's lower, those amounts would be lower. Same with enrollment. If enrollment's higher or lower, those amounts would be higher or lower as well. So those are kind of the two factors going into user fees. On expenses, going down to that line, next year, you can see the bump up to 80 million. That is what the board had approved as the $9 million transition cost for the call center. So that's a one-time cost to really, it's an overlap of us having our call center ramping up, being hired, the training underway so that we can take the phone lines over on January 1st, 2028. So that's that one-time bump up in operations. And then operations after that kind of go back to that low 70 million basis with some standard increases included there. On the reinsurance line, just highlighting in 2028, there's one other one-time bump up, the 60 million. That was also voted on in the February board meeting as a one-time bump up to reinsurance costs to try to help mitigate some of the disruption caused from federal policies. So that's on what we would pay in 2028 for the 2027 coverage year. After that, we just assume kind of going back down to in the 50 million range with a 3% increase. Noting that all of these are just standard projection numbers, all of these would be discussed with the board for each year. We're just trying to give an illustrative budget of what these numbers could look like as we move out into the years. For the overrun, you see the 31 million there. That's an actual overrun for this year, but we also just projected out, assuming there might be an overrun next year. So we have a 20 million overrun accounted for there. Now in 2028, again, if we're thinking about the 2-year lag now, this is when we start to have some levers that we can pull. right? Because we can now, and this is what the insurance department is looking at when they set reinsurance parameters, is trying to get the projected budget more in line with what the claims costs might be. So we are looking at 2028, and I think that will be a key year to be able to see if those levers that can be pulled through the reinsurance parameters are successful in aligning costs with expenses. But we have a $10 million overrun there, again, just for illustrative purposes of kind of having that overrun go down. And you can see that does create several years of an operating loss. Some of that is intentional. For example, when we had the call center budget approved, we did note that that would likely cause some use of the reserves. And then looking at 2029, I mean, really just wanted to show that we do believe that over time we have a operating revenue that would be more than operating expenses. So again, on the revenue side, we tried to take a relatively conservative approach. On the expenses side, I want to note we have more levers. We will have more levers in 2029 than we have today. We'll have an in-house call center where we'll be able to adjust expenses based on enrollment and based on our budget, making direct trade-offs to get budget where we need it to be. We have the other existing levers with how much marketing and outreach we do, and various other operational expenses that we currently have as being able to fluctuate. Reinsurance, I mean, really that will be a discussion with the board as we get closer to setting that number. But if you look at that outlook, we would have more revenue than expenses with some plus in the operating net, but we would still have, even in that scenario, $15 million of usable reserves to cover any gaps. And going back to the beginning, we would still have $75 million in emergency reserves that we have not touched in any of these years. So all of that to say that, you know, I think a year and a half ago, we had a really great budget, very flush with kind of reserves and a very, very excellent position. In the fall, we were really looking at worst case scenarios based on enrollment and really looking at some dire budgetary situations. Where I think we are now is kind of right in the middle, right? Like we are not as great as in a great position as we were a year and a half ago with really high enrollment and continued expectation of high enrollment. We are also not in as dire of a situation as we were thinking we might be before we went into open enrollment and really saw what happened with the cost increases with the lack of enhanced tax credits. So I really think we are sort of in this middle lane where we've carefully managed, you know, continuing to carefully manage our budget, just like we have been for a number of years. We will really be having a solid path forward on our budget in the future.
Cheryl has a question.
Yeah, hey, Devin, thanks for that. Could you talk just a little bit more about how you arrived at the, you know, the potential reinsurance overrun? I mean, it seems like that's obviously the wild card. What kind of factors went into it? How comprehensive was the analysis? Just a little more color would help.
Yeah.
Cheryl, I could jump in for Devin because it's based on numbers that PIG projects running it through our actuary consultants. So they go in, they look at enrollment trends, they look at where the premium is, they make expectations surrounding how many people would move markets based on the amount of increase that premium could be, and they look at where the current enrollment is to project out. So we will actually have a much better idea of what that $20 million number looks like for 27 in about 2 months, because the way the federal government does reinsurance is it will put out the calculation soon. So June, July is when we know a year in advance how much pass-through money we will get, because a lot of it is dependent. The pass-through money, just to be clear, is the bulk of the payments for reinsurance. It's not the money from Pennie. So like this year, last year's claims were somewhere around $250 million. 50 comes from Pennie and now the 30 additional overrun, but 165 comes through federal pass through. So the outside actuaries help put together the numbers based on the past to make the projections for the future to come up with what the reinsurance numbers could look like. It also goes into what we project out for the next filing period. Like when we do our data call at the beginning of the year with all you companies, pulling information to determine what we want to put in the filing guidance for 2027. It's that information that goes back to the actuary teams when we build out what we project out.
So the actuaries developed it all the way to 2029. It just seems so far out, and there's so many things that can change. I mean, you have to wonder how much confidence you have in that number at this point. The potential, I mean, you're talking $60 million right there. I mean, that's a lot of cash, a lot of money.
Well, and that's where I think some of the levers come in. Like 20 million is right now the worst case scenario based on the reasonable projections by the actuaries. It could be $5 million. So the range of outcomes based on how enrollment sticks throughout the rest of this year, it varied from somewhere between an overrun being like $4.5–5 million to a little over $19 million. So I think Devin picked the far end so that we can better prepare as a board for what it could look like. But the more probable scenario is that it is less than $20 million right now. And for 2028's number, as we planned out the filing guidance for 2027, we reduced the reinsurance premium, the program, so there would be less likelihood for overrun. So where in the past it's been somewhere around 4 to 4.5%, where we posted it at 3% impact of reinsurance on premiums for next year, in part to kind of start to stabilize the challenge that we've seen over the last year. Because as the companies on this call know, claims spiked in 2025. They really started spiking towards the end of 24, but then last year was just really high. And that was kind of what led to a number that far exceeded what early projections were from a year and a half prior. Because remember, right now I'm projecting for claims in 27 that'll be paid in 28. So it's challenging, but kind of the best work that the actuaries can do to try to pull all those pieces together and providing us estimates. Joel?
Tough time to be an actuary. Thank you.
Devin, thank you for walking through that. That was very helpful. A couple of things. Under 26, where you have the 131 million, the way I'm viewing that is that number is really 56 million, because what you did is you took the 56 plus the 75 to get to the 131, but you're setting the 75 million aside, that emergency reserve, that leaves the 56. So really what you're showing is you're showing that from 26 through 28, that your net position is going down. You're having a net loss, it looks like, driven by reinsurance, but then ultimately a net gain in 29. And the whole time you're maintaining that $75 million reserve. That makes a lot of sense to me. The thing I don't think I'm following, because I think at the end of this conversation, really what we're going, the ask is, are we going to revise the budget 26 to allow the greater amount for the reinsurance payment? Assuming that statement is correct, why aren't we doing that now for 27? Why aren't we just going ahead and saying, hey, we are estimating increased reinsurance payments into 27. We're looking to adjust the budget for 26 to allow that additional 30 some odd million that you already talked about. And we're anticipating this in 27. So it's just an element of a revised budget.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we haven't voted on or approved anything for 2027 at this point. So I think our plan was to kind of do that more holistically, because of what's been approved by the board up to this point has been for 2026. And there have been components like the call center, and reinsurance for 2 years out, but everything else in the 2027 column is tentative.
So thank you. And so when ultimately we do look at the 27 budget, we really won't be talking about it as a reinsurance overrun. We'll be talking about it as an increased reinsurance cost built into the budget for 27. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, that is one option. I think the challenge is that we don't get actual claims information in total that's more real, that's kind of closest to what it's going to be until we won't know that until actually next year coming out into March and April. So I think there's sort of different options of when we can assume that money will be spent or vote on that money to be spent. The more you wait until next March or April, the more exact the number will be. I think we wanted to, for this purpose, show that even if it is on the higher range currently being estimated, trying to show that even with these high numbers, our budget would still work out over the years such that it's not like taking a vote on the 31 million today won't put us into dire straits immediately for next year. So we wanted to kind of just show with placeholders and kind of rough estimates how all these different pieces could play out over time.
Got it. Thank you.
And I think too, Devin, like at our next meeting, if we were to look at this chart again, we will have much better data for the potential reinsurance overrun number and the transfer to reinsurance. So we could update those numbers. Joel, the way that the schedule works, I mentioned it's dependent on the federal government in terms of when we get our pass through for the following year. But then the tricky part gets to companies are allowed until the end of April to submit their claims into the Edge server. So if you asked me 6 weeks ago, this 31 number looked closer to 25 to 27 until the additional claims dump came in. And that's the final claims dump at the end of April. So we kind of clean it back up after that number.
Yep. Thanks.
Devin, any other questions for Devin on this slide? I think you have a couple more, right?
This is the last one on the budget before going to the recommendation of paying the 31 million for this year. So if there's any other questions on the overall budget and the outlook, this would be the time before moving to that slide.
And just for in the interest of full disclosure for the board members, I think the interesting piece with Act 42 is, but for Pennie, like the other option to not pay 30 million is you have to haircut the insurers on what their reinsurance recoverable will be. But we think because as Mike Humphreys thinks, that because we have companies that lock in these rates, the year prior, they received claims on these policies throughout, that if we were to kind of really break the precedent we've had of always paying reinsurance at 100%, that has an impact on future rates. We wouldn't necessarily get the same cooperation from companies when they file rates because there would be some element that we won't get back reinsurance at 100%, and that hasn't been the case. Under Act 42, a large part of Pennie, in addition to providing access to insurance coverage here, was to support the reinsurance program. So I'm really supportive of kind of the transfer and really showing that Pennie supports the reinsurance portion of this to, I think, the good of the insurance market and to consumers really on the whole, because what it means for the entirety of the system, all the way from rate filing through the approval process to the claims year before the refunds come the following year. So Devin, I will turn it back to you for kind of where the recommendation is. Or I don't think there's a slide. I think I'm looking for a motion to authorize, well, here it is, authorize an additional funding amount of up to 31 million for the reinsurance program in this calendar year budget to pay the full reinsurance overrun for 2025 coverage year. Representative Venkat.
Thanks, Commissioner Humphreys. Just a question, and I apologize if you feel like you've covered this already. I'm supportive of this motion. I think we have no choice but to do this. But are you anticipating any reforms that you would look at, given the patterns that we're seeing that is leading to this additional funding amount being required? I know you mentioned about utilization being up. Are we seeing this on a per claim basis, or is this structured currently that if there is an overall cost to an insurer above a certain level, regardless of the pattern of how that occurred, that we are on the hook in terms of reinsurance coverage in this regard? So, I'll be supportive of this motion. I'm happy to make this motion, but I'm trying to think about what the future, structure should be.
Yeah, appreciate that, Representative. And that's where on the PID side, we're erring on more conservative until we see really what the impact of HR1 and the policies in between have done to the marketplace. So I think by pulling back and reducing reinsurance back to an impact of 3%, we'll see where enrollment looks like it's going to settle. We'll see where premiums start to settle to be able to kind of build back up towards what the future looks like. But by pulling it back right now from just the reinsurance standpoint in the filings, it gives us more of just a conservative outlay that won't necessarily, that should prevent spikes like this as we see moving into 27 to be paid in 28. Does that answer your question? Or are you looking for additional information?
Yes. If PID is looking at how to this issue moving forward, then that's more than enough for me.
Yeah, we historically the program was, I think, thought to be able to provide a 5 to 10% reduction on insurance premiums, but the way our funding structure works, the way the math works is often closer to 4 to 5.5%. And given kind of the volatility over the last year and a half, we pulled that back so that we wouldn't have to create a situation where there's a conversation in the future about haircuts versus working with Pennie to make sure we continue to pay at 100% for these immediate kind of spike years. Did anyone else have a question? Devin, did you have anything else you wanted to add on kind of the planning? And just for the rest of the group's benefit, like my team works pretty closely with Pennie's team as we find out more information from the actuaries outside after we do the data call to figure out kind of what our expectations are, how they compare to Pennie's expectations. So PID isn't creating a situation where we knowingly go into a position that would put Pennie in a tougher spot. We try to match up the available resources versus what we're looking for in terms of premium reduction on our side, to the extent you can. Obviously, 2025 was a unexpected year when we were in the spring of 24. But I think going forward, this is something that we've already built into our process that'll be effective for 2027 rates, which come in actually tomorrow. So we'll see, Devin, to the point on your chart on what expected future premiums look like. And I think your estimate of 3 to 5%, which was was obviously far lower than what was ultimately approved last year. So that's another point, Joel, that I think the August meeting will just have so much better information in terms of not only the pass through, but how whatever the premium rates that come in tomorrow will impact kind of the overall program in terms of revenue and potential premium in the future. Any other questions? All right, appreciate the overview of the budget, Devin, and the reinsurance challenge, and looking for that motion to authorize the additional funding.
This is Joel. I'll make that motion.
Joel moves. Do we have a second? Colleen seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously. Appreciate that. And Devin, we will move on to the next item.
Okay, so the second issue that I mentioned at the top of being something that has really increased in activity over the past several months are some enrollment issues we have seen related to fraudulent enrollments. So on the next slide, we'll talk through some of what we're seeing, and we'll walk through the many actions we have taken in order to address this issue with some recommended changes at the end. So Pennie, along with other marketplaces across the country, have experienced a surge in enrollments that we have found to be likely fraudulent and contain material misrepresentations. Wanted to note that at current, the number is relatively low in terms of enrollments themselves. So we have found about nearly 400 policies that we are concerned about. We know that insurers are working on investigating others. The 400 would put us at less than 0.1%. But again, we know there are additional ones that are being investigated that might inch that up. But the bigger issue is that while a small number relatively, the amount of claims dollars associated with these fraudulent policies are significant, and if not removed, could cause cost increases for everyone across the entire health insurance system, and simply are untenable in terms of, from a perspective of program integrity and Pennie not allowing ineligible and fraudulent enrollments in our system. So we are taking a three-pronged approach in identifying policies that we believe are concerning, have activities that do not have any rational explanation for a legitimate enrollment, focusing on removing those policies when we find them. And this is really important because the main tool we have here is rescissions, where if insurers see something that is problematic on their end, they can request a rescission. We approve that, and that removes the policy in its entirety, including any claims associated with that policy. So when we cut off the money to the bad actor, that's expected to be the single largest deterrent that we could have. The only reason they are pursuing these enrollments is to make money off of the claims. If we block the enrollments, remove the enrollments, and thus remove the claims, there will be no incentive for the bad actor to continue perpetuating the scheme through Pennie. We are also looking at prevention and how we can look at any aspects of our system where we think there might be potential for misuse or vulnerabilities in order to keep bad actors from completing improper enrollments. And as we'll get into in a moment, we specifically looked at special enrollment periods, and we'll be discussing that more. So focusing on the removing policies for a moment, we have seen a marked increase in rescission requests from insurers related to these policies. And the numbers keep changing daily. So currently we're a little over 380 policies. And again, we know that there are more investigations underway. We did make a streamlined process in early March to try to be clearer about what is expected in a rescission request. with insurers so that it could streamline the process both on their end and our end in terms of these volumes. To put the volumes in context, in past years, we've typically maybe done 5 to 10 rescissions a month, maybe. So having hundreds come in a matter of a couple of months is a really significant increase and really speaks to the orchestrated scheme that we have going on here. And this really is the first time that Pennie has seen such a kind of coordinated effort. And again, when we look at the experience of other marketplaces, it is not just happening here, it's happening in other markets as well. So there really is a pretty large effort on the part of the bad actor to perpetuate these enrollments through marketplaces. Through that streamlined process, we did reduce the review of those rescission requests from what previously was over a month to less than 15 days. So we cut that by more than half. And we have approved 97% of the rescission requests. Oftentimes that other 3% usually just need additional information. And then with that information and evidence, we have approved those as well. And that's associated with, again, a significant 98% of the claims that are reported to be associated with these policies would not be going to the bad actor in that instance once the policy is rescinded. So, in looking at the continued volumes that we are seeing, this week we've rolled out an expedited process on top of the streamlined one. But this was really looking at what the fact patterns were that we had been seeing in those 380 that we already have approved. There were really some very consistent markers of what policies were being perpetuated through this scheme. So we have now set out an expedited process that we've worked with insurers on and rolled it out earlier this week, whereby there is a faster process when the policies fit these very specific fact patterns. This also includes Pennie-initiated reviews. Again, when we've dug into these policies and we can see certain activities happening that, again, there's no justifiable explanation for a legitimate enrollment. We have also set up a structure where we can share that information with insurers to confirm that they are also seeing improper claims on their side to expedite the rescission of those policies. Now, our goal with all of these processes is to try to get all of the enrollments that we think are improper and perpetuated by this bad actor off the books by August 1st. So what we are really working with the insurers who are impacted by this to do over the next month is to get as many of those known policies and those known policies with those known fact patterns into the rescission process, approved for rescission. There is a 30-day consumer notification. So that would run roughly from mid-June to mid-July. And then we would process those rescissions in the last 2 weeks of July, such that they are effectively off the books by the beginning of August. This is really important because we want to make sure that we clear out these bad actor policies before we go into open enrollment. That renewal process really does start in August with the finalization of the rates. And then we quickly move into starting open enrollment processes that, as we know, open enrollment is 2 weeks earlier this year. So those are all moved up a little bit earlier. So we are working in close coordination with insurers to really pursue this aggressive timeline in order, again, to try to have these policies that we know are following fact patterns that are clearly misrepresentative or fraudulent, and have those policies removed by the beginning of August. And again, this is expected to have, the single largest deterrent to the bad actor in cutting off access to those claims dollars. So next, we want to talk about our efforts at prevention. So we have really looked comprehensively at different ways, looking at the fact patterns and the examples we have thus far, about how we could potentially prevent these improper enrollments from happening in the first place. One area of misuse that we have identified is with special enrollment periods. So outside of open enrollment, there are 25 qualifying life events that someone can have in order to enroll during open enrollment. The policy around whether someone needs to submit documentation or whether the system verifies it was set by the board way back in, I think, late 2020 or early 2021. And at the time, we had stated that we would continue to look at consumer activity And if any misuse or any other concerns were raised, that we would bring it back to the board. So that is the conversation that we will have over the next couple of slides here. As a reminder, during special enrollment periods, people cannot complete an enrollment until their SEP eligibility is confirmed. This contrasts, for example, with other eligibility criteria like income, where you can receive coverage with conditional eligibility until you prove that income. With SEPs, when there is a requirement to submit documents, you are not able to even pick a plan until you submit that document, and that document is approved by Pennie. So we have identified concerns in the 6 qualifying life events that currently do not require documentation and are not otherwise verified. And here's the breakout of the 25. We have about 12 that already require customer documentation. For example, the Move to Pennsylvania SEP. This is for new enrollees who are outside of Pennsylvania and moving to Pennsylvania. They must provide documents both of moving to Pennsylvania and of having coverage in the last 60 days. There is a continuous coverage requirement for this SEP under the regulations. So that's one example. There are 7 that are system automated, where the system itself can look at the application changes and know that someone's eligible. For example, when we receive an account transfer from Medicaid that says someone has lost Medicaid because their income went up, that opens a loss of Medicaid or CHIP SEP for them, because we are receiving that account transfer directly from an official source, being DHS. The 6 that only require attestation currently are loss of other coverage, release from incarceration, birth, adoption, gain of a court-appointed dependent, and the last one, member of American Indian or Alaska Native tribe, also referred to as AIAN. Now, on this last one, we did see a significant and unjustifiable increase in activity to the AIAN SEP in early March. So we did, on an emergency basis, add a documentation requirement to that SEP. And then that really drove us to continue an in-depth analysis of all SEPs throughout April. So we did, with, again, a quarterly release that we had alongside of that, we have already added a documentation requirement to the AIAN SEP. So on the next slide, a recommendation, again, this is based on in-depth analysis of behavior that we're seeing and application patterns that we're seeing. We are recommending that we add a documentation requirement for the 6 remaining of Pennie's qualifying life events. So that would temporarily be, for 1, that's birth, until the system can automatically open the SEP for birth. So what this would look like is the system could see that a baby was added to the application and that baby has all the requisite information to be added to the household, and then automatically open the SEP. The functionality is not currently in the system, so until then, we would be recommending having documentation requirement for that. For the other ones, our recommendation would be to permanently add documentation requirements. So that's loss of coverage, release from incarceration. This would be formalizing the policy on AIAN, again, because we did that on an emergency basis, and then adoption and gain a court-appointed dependent. One activity that we saw was that people would shop around for an SEP. So they would submit an application, and if there was a documentation requirement, the application would be resubmitted with a different SEP until they could find one that didn't require documentation. So the part of the recommendation here is to add that documentation requirement for the 6 that currently just take attestation, because if, in what we've seen, if we don't do all of them, the one that we don't do will be potentially misused. And the next bullet is really just for awareness. We're just kind of trying to clean up and simplify some of our other SEPs. So there are 2 that have always been document-based. If there's an exchange error or exceptional circumstance, we see a lot of confusion around those. So we're just removing those from the drop-down. Those are still ones that consumers can get if they call in, but those in the past have only really been available through document review anyway, and really on a very unique perspective. Because of the confusion there, we're going to make that more of a back-end process. One note on the Medicaid chip, as I mentioned, we do automatically open that when we get an account transfer from Medicaid. We also had the option for the consumer to attest to losing Medicaid. In our analysis, we felt that we don't need both and that the account transfer from Medicaid is sufficient to open that SEP automatically. And that removes the opportunity for an attestation there when perhaps an attestation is not appropriate. And then we also just found a couple of other minor things. For example, the marriage SEP is supposed to require people to provide evidence of continuous coverage. So we found a gap in that functionality and are addressing that as well. So those last groups are just some other examples of ways that we are really trying to clean up and make sure that the paths forward for SEPs are very clear and that we have sufficient information to feel confident in opening an SEP for any of these qualifying life events.
Devin, can you take a question?
Mm-hmm.
Amy? You're on mute, Amy. If you're talking.
There we go. Yeah,
There
I'm
we go.
sorry.
Yep.
My buttons were hidden. I just had a quick question on the Medicaid piece. So if somebody does not come over through an account transfer, which can happen if somebody decides, like, some people terminate their Medicaid, some people might decide not to renew because they know they're not eligible. Is there still what pathway will they have then?
I believe they could still use the loss of other coverage and provide documentation of that loss of Medicaid.
Okay, so they'll still have a path. So is it because there's a separate Medicaid chip category for loss of Medicaid chip? I just can't remember. Okay.
Yeah, there's actually like 3 different loss of other coverage categories in the drop down. That's a little probably confusing to consumers anyway, but there is a separate one for loss of Medicaid chip. So I think in this case, they could come through the lost other coverage, but they would be required to submit documentation showing that they lost Medicaid versus when we get the account transfer, they wouldn't have to show documentation because we already have it from an official source that they lost coverage due to income.
So if they chose the drop down for loss of Medicaid and chip, could you still just ask for the coverage if you don't have the account transfer, or are you just eliminating that from the option?
We were going just to eliminate it to keep it simplified to the loss of other coverage. David, I don't know if you know the answer to that.
Yeah, so there really isn't a reason why someone would have to go outside of the account transfer process to select the loss of Medicaid or chip coverage. Anyone who loses that coverage is sent to us anyways. And Amy, the if someone voluntarily withdraws from Medicaid, they're not eligible for APTC with us anyway. So it's just we already allow, like, that's an automatic. Someone comes over from DHS having lost Medicaid or chip, they get an automatic SEP. That's really the route we want them to go, because if people come in outside of that process, it creates very wonky looking applications, and it's very hard to track where people are actually coming from and how they lost Medicaid.
So I understand the issue of, like, people who might withdraw from coverage, or they might do it because they know they're no longer eligible, which I don't think necessarily makes them ineligible for the other category. But there are also people who at renewal understand they're not eligible and they don't complete the renewal paperwork and decide to apply for Pennie instead. They don't get account transfer because they're considered to be, in my understanding, to be somebody who because they procedurally terminated, but they may have done that because they just knew, why go through putting together all this material if I know I'm not eligible? So I'm concerned that we're going to miss that population. I'm not saying that you won't. It's very unfortunate. We're asking for documentation. I'm not saying you won't ask for documentation, but they need to know how they're going to be able to, what selections they're going to be able to make.
Yes, I think we could provide like consumer education on that. I think they would be able to select loss of other coverage, it being Medicaid, And then they would have to submit a document just like anyone else who selects loss of other coverage, but it would be a document from Medicaid saying the end date or just showing when their coverage was going to end. And then that would satisfy the documentation requirement and they'd be able to proceed with enrollment.
Okay, I'm gonna think through that. Thanks.
Okay, Colleen?
Where we're, currently there are documentation requirements, and obviously we're looking to add some additional documentation requirements. On the back end, what is the review process of verifying that the documents are actually valid? Like what percentage of the documents submitted would be audited to ensure they're valid?
So if we go 2 slides down, I would say the next slide is sort of just a reference slide of all the SEPs that we had and aligns the category. But if we go to the slide after that, that gets into documentation. So I can, yep, perfect. So with the enrollment process relying more on documentation, we are also increasing our review procedures. For example, when we added a documentation requirement to AIAN, we have been reviewing those completely in order to verify the documentation that's being provided for that SEP. We have added additional training at the call center, and we are also will be auditing specifically based on high risk areas. We'll be auditing a higher percent, and on low risk areas, a lower percent, with the Pennie staff directly to try to immediately identify any issues with documentation, any trends we're seeing, anything that we can use to basically continuously enhance our ability to identify when a document is not valid and then not approve that SEP.
Is there a targeted percentage of the documentation that you're going to actually review? It sounded like the Alaskan, the AI, sorry, I can't remember the IAAI, I can't, that you're doing 100% of that right now? Like what is the, I guess, just trying to understand, because obviously that can become if somebody feels like, hey, if I submit this documentation and it's not really getting looked at, it creates another hole. So I'm just trying to understand how bulletproof we're making the process to ensure the integrity of the overall.
Yep. Yeah, it's a great question. And I think we are happy to follow up with more details on that. I think given it's a public meeting, I think we want to say that we are making it very bulletproof and we are really focused in high attention on high risk areas, and we'll continue to review as much as possible. Just since this is publicly available and recorded, I think, happy to provide additional information directly on what we're looking at doing to make sure that we are comprehensive.
Joel?
Devin, thank you for this conversation. I think this is a very big problem that requires, big action. I think a lot of the things you have talked about are a strong step in the right direction. I encourage all of it, including the SEP documentation and the things we're going to talk about. One comment, I know your earlier slide talked about rescission as a focus. And I think, of course, that's correct with respect to anybody who's already enrolled. My personal view is that the more appropriate, the more maybe directed approach is to not let the people be enrolled in the first place. So I think it's a two-pronged approach. You've got to do everything you can to prevent people from being fraudulently enrolled in the first place. And then if they get past that first net, then we've got to do everything we can to get them off the rolls through rescission. And I think the rescission steps you've talked about are good. I only want to encourage that I think there's some more work to be done. I think there's got to be clarity, communication with the insurers, constant evaluation of this, and kind of updating our thinking. Colleen just brought up a very good point about how do we make sure that paperwork is genuine. There are going to be questions on the group or the bulk rescissions, just things like, time frames for when we see claims versus data service, residency documentation, what's sufficient. So not to solve here, not to problem solve here, just really to say this is a step in the right direction. I hope Pennie views this as, one of many steps that's constantly being refined and evaluated as we move forward. Just a couple of questions, or maybe asking you for the comment on. So can you talk a little bit about how all of these things you've discussed so far, how they align with what the insurers are doing in-house, how you guys are coordinating that? And then second part of that is talk a little bit about what Pennie is doing to kind of upscale its ability to deal with this magnitude of fraud that, as you said at the beginning, is just not something that you guys have seen before.
Sure, and I'll start with the second question first, I think. On the next slide, we'll talk about kind of more of a formalized structure that we've put in Pennie to make sure that not only can we react and rapidly refine our approach, which hopefully, as we talked about, we have been doing that kind of every week. We've been looking at what more can we do, what more are we finding, what more data can we analyze to figure out where this problem is. I do want to note, in talking with other states, some other states were hit with this a little bit ahead of us, and we are sharing ideas on how to address this issue. And we are doing many of the things that other states are doing, in some places going further than what other states have done. And those states have seen an abatement of this issue. So we know it is possible, and we are doing all the same things plus additional things in order to both prevent these improper enrollments and deal with them when we have them. It's sort of more of a formalized structure moving forward, because yes, we are seeing this in a more coordinated way than we've ever seen before. And we want to make sure that once we succeed in getting this to abate in Pennsylvania, wanting to make sure that we have a structure in place to identify and get early warnings on this if something like this comes up again. With any fraudster, right? They try something, and then they try something else, and then they go away for a while, and then they come back trying something different. So we want to make sure that if they come back, we catch them earlier, we can address it earlier, and we can put it to bed quicker with all the tools that we are rapidly developing and will continue to develop. So we have established a fraud prevention work group within Pennie. We had stood up sort of a more narrowly focused program integrity work group in December to focus on broker activity, and that has been successful. We've referred 71 brokers over to PID already based on behavior concerns that we've seen there. So we're kind of taking what has worked there and it being a cross-functional team across Pennie with people from policy and operations and the call center and the tech side, all working together to identify and research where we see this as happening, how else can we tell, what information can we see on our side. And that is really what drove one of these expedited reviews, in that we are seeing things that only we can see in our system that is not explainable behavior. And so that's helping, we're trying to coordinate with insurers. There's some information that only insurers have, which is the claims. And there's some information only we can see, which is some of the changes and activities that are happening behind the scenes on the application. So I think our goal is to take what we can see and what insurers can see, pair that together when we have a known case where it's fitting all the fact patterns and there's no other explanation for why these things are occurring, having those go through the expedited process. So that is, I think evidence of how we are trying to rapidly evolve to address this issue as the scope has become clearer. And this work group is intended to be a permanent fixture. So it's not just once we are, successful in getting these enrollments to abate. The idea is to have this constantly, at varying levels, depending on what we're seeing, but setting up early warning systems that if we see something that's kind of the same nature that we've seen in the current issue, that we're able to highlight that to insurers more quickly to say, hey, looks like maybe something's creeping back in. Like, let's all be on guard. Let's try to catch it and prevent it from becoming a bigger issue, and being able to do that earlier on. So that is the goal of this work group, both to address things that we are doing, that we are seeing currently, finding out more ways to address that, creating dashboards that will tell us if certain things are happening more, that will be those early warnings. Again, well, it helps us deal with it now, but then those will serve as early warnings once we get this issue to stop and if there's any type of similar activity that comes back in the future. So I kind of answered the insurer question in there, but I do think we really view ourselves as, fraud is bad for everyone. No one wants it here. It's bad for our program, for costs, for the whole system in general. So I think really we are going to most effectively address this when we are all working together with the various pieces of information we have and the various tools we have to find who has the best information to inform these identification of these policies. How do we put that information together to do that more quickly? And what are the strongest tools we have on our end that's looking at things like preventing people from getting through into the beginning. On the insurer side, you guys have claims data that we don't have access to that really tends to sometimes be well, in the past that has, in this example, has been the leading indicator, but we want to make it that we can get the leading indicators even without the claims information based on these kind of patterns we've been able to identify. So I think that answers both your questions, but if I didn't, happy to elaborate.
No, it does. Thank you for that. And I appreciate the forward thinking, the prospective part, because as you say, I mean, this might be the current fraud scheme we are dealing with, but there will be another one and this one will evolve. And so you're making sure that Pennie has the resources, the expertise, and is keeping its eye on this ball will be extremely important going forward. So thank you for that.
And Joel, before I go back to Devin, because this dovetails nicely into something that I've been thinking about, and I'm told that I can't call a series of meetings without a vote, but I was thinking that it would be valuable if this board got together maybe monthly for the next couple of months to get status updates on where we are in this process. I was thinking biweekly, maybe biweekly is a little bit too frequent for people, but like Devin laid out a plan where a lot of this could be off insured books by mid-August. So I think it would be positive if we got together on, let's say, Friday afternoon at 1, and only for an hour, to hear from Devin on how trends are looking after we presumably take action today, how the process is developing with the fraud prevention work group, other parties that she may be bringing in and staff may be bringing in, including PID, to have conversations on how we can do this, and hearing back from insurers and where we need to go into executive session. I think we could, if we wanted to get into a more specific in the weeds issue area. But I think for a board, this is really, and I've been here almost since the beginning of the board, this is the first real substantial fraud initiative. And I think we want to make sure we get it right. And I think the board needs to be here and kind of hear these updates and give feedback to Devin and the team. So interested in what board members think about like a monthly meeting to connect to make sure we get this right. Joel.
I'm still off mute, so I'll go first. I think that is a good idea. I think widening that circle to include the insurers is a good idea. As far as the full board, it may make sense to designate a subcommittee to do that versus pulling everybody in and maybe have just a subcommittee who participates in those calls. But that's exactly the level of ongoing communication. And in my mind, I'm almost thinking bi-weekly, just because, we're all kind of dealing with this so intensely right now. But I think it's a generally good idea.
Ellen, well,
I was going to say I support the original kind of draft there. Definitely would be interested in participating. We'll leave to the larger group to define the scope. But to your point, I think it's worthy of board attention. It's getting a lot of national press right now, and I think we want to be leaders and not reactive. And I think this is the way for us to continue to be in front of it.
anyone else have a thought there? Colleen?
I would just agree. with what's been said by everyone. I think it's important that we stay on top of this. It is ever changing. And, as we're identifying trends, whether it's on the carrier side or on Pennie directly, I think it's in our best interest to be able to understand, what's happening and stop any fraud as quickly as possible.
Right. Any other thoughts? And I guess I'll add that as a second vote when we get there, but I know Devin has more to present also. So let's put a pin in that and let Devin finish the presentation here. Devin, I know we jumped a couple slides forward, then we went backwards. So kicking it back to you to see where you feel like you may not have addressed through Q&A.
Yeah, I think we mostly covered. I mean, I would just note a couple of slides back just shows all the SEPs, so that can be there for reference, just for the full list of what's already system automated, what already has documentation requirements, and then those bolded ones are the new ones. So that really jumps us just into the recommendation. So going forward a couple of slides to one with it. Yep, perfect. So our proposal is to add those documentation requirements for the remaining qualifying life events that currently are attestation based. I think we're kind of clear on the goal here to prevent misuse, make sure everything's being appropriately used. And, I do want to recognize that we are very cognizant that this does put additional burden on legitimate enrollees to qualify for an SEP. And in general, we try to reduce the burden for consumers coming in. So just recognizing that these two goals are kind of in tension on this one, but given the data on the misuse that we've seen, we really do feel like that necessitates a documentation requirement because that misuse is blatant in some cases. So, but did want to just acknowledge we are trying to make sure that proper legitimate enrollees have all the information they need to provide the requisite documents in order to qualify for their QLE and get their special enrollment period. And we'll make sure that the assisters and brokers have that information as well to support consumers through that process. And as I mentioned before, we are ramping up our documentation review, both at the call center and providing extra incentives for call center reps reviewing the documents to be able to identify ones that might be fake or invalid, and then following through on the back end with Pennie staff directly reviewing those documents as well. So with that, the recommendation on the next slide is to add documentation requirements for the 6 qualifying life events that currently do not have them in order to act as a preventive mechanism to avoid continuation of the improper enrollments and the SEP misuse that we've seen.
And Devin, just so I'm clear, we vote yes on this. How quickly can this be turned on?
So we are prepared to put these system changes through tonight if there is an affirmative vote on this. So these would go through pretty much immediately.
Very good. Okay. Antoinette, question?
I just have a quick question. If this goes through tonight, how are you going to communicate it to the broker and a sister network? Because they're the ones that are used to helping folks with this. So how do we educate those folks as well as, are we going to put it up on the Pennie website? Like, how will people know what's the plan around education?
Good question.
Yeah, great question. So we do have drafted an email that we would send out to assisters and brokers tomorrow morning with the new documentation requirement, should it be approved, along with a document list of what would be sufficient to be approved for the SEPs. We also are planning to add FAQs to the website tomorrow that also reference that list for consumers. And then when consumers go through the process, they would see on-screen messaging about the documentation requirement and the list of documents based on whatever qualifying life event they choose. So yeah, we would be planning to immediately send out notification to assisters and brokers as well in the morning once we confirm that everything went through the system as expected.
Okay, great.
Very good. Do we have a motion?
Moved.
Ellen
This is Ellen.
moves. Second.
No second.
Colleen seconds. Further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
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 Hey,
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries unanimously. So following up before we get to call centers on the second issue that I just mentioned about pulling up a special meeting or series of meetings, I think, and I don't have this written anywhere, but with a holiday coming up, I'm thinking about the 5th, June 5th. So that's right at 3 weeks, 1, 2, 3. And then 1, 2, 3 after that gets in between Juneteenth and the 4th of July. So I think, and I'll open this up to discussion before we figure out what language looks like. But my proposal would be to schedule, in addition to our already approved schedule, meetings of the board on June 5th and June 26th. To receive updates from the Pennie team on kind of how our fraud solutions are going, bring any issues stemming from the new requirements for submission of information, and also to hear from any insurers or others on kind of how the process appears to be going on their side. Is Friday a bad day for people generally? I try to avoid holidays. Holidays make it look like 3 weeks is better than 2, but I do think we've all kind of committed to understanding that this is an important issue that the board needs to stay apprised of and provide oversight for Devin and her team. So I'm totally open on schedules. Maybe Friday is a bad day. Do people do 3-day weekends or 4-day work week sometimes in the summer? I don't know, but my initial thought is the 5th and 26th. Questions, feedback?
No issues here. I think it makes sense.
Same.
Board council, AP, do you actually want a vote, or can we, by consensus, say that we're going to go forward and schedule special meetings on the 5th and 26th?
If it's going to be more of a subcommittee matter, then no vote is needed. If we want to make it more official, then a vote could be needed.
I don't know if I envision it as a subcommittee or not, because I want the board to be invited.
Okay.
So anyone that would want to participate, like Amy may have some additional thoughts after she gets to think more about how it works for some of the Medicaid enrollees. So I tend to think it's open for board members to come and have that discussion, recognizing that not everybody will be able to make it.
Let's just
Anybody
do it. Go ahead.
object to keeping it open to the board? Because to me, it would be a public board meeting that continues to show kind of our efforts to rein this issue in and hopefully address it based on Devin's schedule, potentially getting a lot of this off by mid-August.
No objections.
Hearing no objections. Anna, do you want a motion to approve an amended meeting schedule that includes 2 meetings in June for the purpose of fraud updates?
Perfect. You just stated a motion.
Okay. Can somebody move that?
This is Joel. I'll move that.
Joel is moving. Do we have a second?
this is Amy. I'll second.
Amy seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Hearing none, we will move forward with having meetings on at least June 5th and 26th. And I think we can revisit when we'd want our follow-up meeting to be, but I think that gives us a good couple weeks to see how this process starts to work. The teams continue to work in the background with insurers on rescission process and front end verification and how that piece works. And I think coming back in 3 weeks is great. So really appreciate everyone's support and dedication to the integrity of the program. With that, we're at an odd point where I think we could break. Do people need to stretch their legs for a minute, or do we want to plow through? I can go either way.
I'd say plow through.
I agree.
Yep.
I agree.
We're plowing right through, Devin, with on the off chance that we can get out ahead of schedule, which this often looks like we might make it, and we never do. So let's see. We'll roll into the call center update.
All right, thanks, Commissioner. So we are a little more than 19 months away from our January 1st, 2028 launch. And our contact center, the high level update is that we are on schedule and on budget. We continue to work through our extensive or detailed project plan, and we want to provide a few updates on kind of the core work streams that are the most pertinent. So on the next slide, we're going to start with technology. So we have selected Genesis, which is used by all the other Commonwealth agencies as well, to provide the key contact center software, which is going to provide us with most of our core contact center capabilities. We've already procured a handful of licenses, and we've begun the process of acclimating ourselves with that system. And we also have the benefit of leveraging other Commonwealth agencies to give us demos and to provide us with their best practices and their lessons learned. What we will be using Genesis for is primarily things like telephony to answer the phone calls and establish chat capabilities. We're also going to be using its interactive voice recognition and interactive virtual assistance capabilities, as well as workforce management, knowledge management, and data analytics. To best utilize Genesis, we are going to have to incorporate it or integrate it with our existing eligibility and enrollment platform that we have procured through a contract with Get Insured. So in a little bit, we're going to talk about kind of what that contract looks like and the future option years and a recommendation that we're going to have for you. But essentially, the crux of it is we're going to be integrating Genesis with this technology platform so that it has access to certain components of consumer data. So we'd be able to help with some self-service features. It would help us with our CSRs getting the information that they need popped up on their agent desktop. And it's a pretty simple integration, but there's a couple working parts that we're moving through right now to determine the high-level requirements and then actually start so that we could have that deployed in early 2027. The next slide covers our next work stream, which is of high importance, and that's workforce and training. So, the contact center, the backbone of any contact center is really a well-trained staff. We have developed a comprehensive hiring plan for every posting, and we also have a tracking tool that we use to continually monitor the progress against that plan. It shows us if there's dependent activities that we need to consider and where we stand in that process. So like I said, we're on schedule. Kind of the high-level overview for 2026 is we are planning on hiring 7 additional employees to help manage contact center technology, workforce development, including training and quality. 4 of those postings have already gone up, and we are working our way through the screening, interview, and selection processes. And the other 3 are in the process of getting posted. So they're still moving through the process. They should be posted soon. They are on schedule. It is within budget. So those should be going up in the coming months and hired in a couple months. In 2027, we're going to bring on the rest of all of the positions. So we would initially start with our program staff that's going to, again, continue to assist with workforce management, scheduling, training, and quality. Those are going to be brought on in the first couple months of 2027. Then we would begin hiring the core staff. And that would include the supervisors, the team leads, and the frontline customer service representatives. They are going to be hired in a staggered approach. So we would start with supervisors and team leads, and that would really begin in mid-2027 when they would be being onboarded. And then we would hire cohorts of customer service representatives throughout the remainder of 2027 so that we could train them and have them ready to go for January 1st, 2028. One thing also worth noting is training is really a core pillar in implementing our strategic intent with the contact center, which is to provide consistent, high quality, accurate answers to everyone, whether they call in, whether they chat us, or whether they send like a web form submission or an email. So we've begun that process of developing our training curriculum by really starting with what consumer journeys look like. So our teams have been working on putting together materials that map out kind of all of the touch points that consumers have when they come to us. If they have data matching inconsistencies, if there's kind of more routine issues that they'd have, like password resets, we have materials developed for all of that, so that could really inform our training curriculum as we continue to develop those materials within our training plan. And the priority or the focus is making sure that we are really starting with what is the highest contact volume and then working our way down that list so that we have the highest volumes kind of ironed out and as buttoned up as possible by the time we end up launching. Additionally, we are able to leverage existing state software for our learning management system. So we were fortunate that we have an LMS that we could use that the Commonwealth uses across all the other agencies. So we're developing expertise in that LMS. We do have licenses to use it, and we're really familiarizing ourselves with it so that we could quickly put our training materials in as we start working through those. And then the next slide provides kind of our last key core component that we wanted to discuss. So I mentioned that we have a comprehensive project plan, and one of the key things that we're bringing in a consulting firm to assist us. So a few months ago, we issued an RF request for proposals for consulting firm services related to the contact center. We received a few submissions. We reviewed those and selected our vendor. The selected vendor is expected to start and be onboarded in late summer. So right now we're targeting September. That is as scheduled, so we're on schedule with that. And then once brought on board, that vendor is really going to help us perform analyses of our new and existing processes. So all the work that we're doing right now, they're going to review that, perform gap analyses, needs assessments, and really provide us with expertise and guidance throughout the entire transition plan so that we are able to smoothly launch and transition away from vendor services to the internal contact center in January 2028. And then this last slide pertaining to the contact center update really just gives it's a refresher from previous board meetings where we've given kind of what our high level milestones are. So Q1 and Q2, we're on schedule. We've met those milestones. Looking ahead to Q3, we will onboard our consulting firm vendor, finalize the requirements for our core technology stack, and finalize the remaining program management staff positions. And then in Q4, we're going to post those positions so that the remaining program staff is brought on again in the first couple months of 2027. And that's pretty much the high level overview. So any questions on that before I transition to the next section? Okay, hearing none.
Rob, remind me, the call center staff is represented, staff civil service and represented. The managers are senior executive staff you can hire off resumes, or do you still post and go through all the traditional process for that?
So it's non-civil service, but we do post it and go through kind of the traditional process, kind of exactly like how like all of the current Pennie staff have been hired for what we're calling our program or management staff. So we still use kind of the similar process that you'd be used to even at PID. But yeah, it's technically non-civil service.
Okay, but call center will be.
They're non-civil service as well. At least we believe they will be. There's a question out with the Office of Administration, but they would, to your point, most likely be unionized staff.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions for Rob on the first part? Kind of timelines and what they're thinking. Okay.
Excellent. And then, so transitioning from that to kind of our contract with Get Insured. So on the next slide, it gives kind of a refresher overview of where we stand. So we have a base contract with Get Insured. that allows us to, it provides us services for both our technology platform and our contact center services currently. So that contract ends at the end of this year. So it runs through December 31st, 2026. And then we have the option for up to 3 renewal years that we could exercise. So with the plan that we just went through with the contact center, we're going to need to exercise 1 option year on the contact center side. So we would exercise the plan year 2028 option year, or 2027 option year, my apologies, to give us that transition runway. So that would be ready to launch on January 1st, 2028. And then concurrently, we're going to recommend exercising all 3 option years on the technology platform side. So essentially for stability purposes and to help us with a smoother transition, we're planning on exercising all 3 on the technology side at once, which would take us through December 31st, 2029. So we're well ahead. We're definitely on schedule with the contact center. We do need that 2027 option year to make sure that it gives us that full transition period. And for the technology platform, we want to make sure that it's, consistency of service and that there's no issues that arise from that, especially as we are starting to incorporate some of these federal changes that came upon us last year. So how this works is basically to exercise all 3 option years. It would cost us a total of $57,912,000 or $912,604, which would include $56.4 million that had originally been included in the initial contract projections, as well as the budget projections that we've consistently been bringing. What the difference would be is there'd be an additional $1.5 million that would be spread equally across all 3 option years. And that $1.5 million provides us with a couple things. So the first is the integration that we mentioned with Genesis on previous slides, to really make sure that our eligibility and enrollment system is integrated where it needs to be with Genesis, our telephony platform, and to also help establish those self-service options. Additionally, there would be additional maintenance within the system, part of kind of ongoing changes that we have, but also because of the integration with Genesis. And then the final component that we'd be paying extra for is essentially enhanced or additional pre-enrollment verification capabilities that we would be asking for earlier and on top of what kind of the roadmap or the basic pre-enrollment verification process Get Insured would be providing their other clients. And the next slide shows us kind of a comparison for what that looks like in terms of what the costs are. So you may notice that, so just to walk through the columns. So the first column shows us what the technology platform by itself costs as per the originally negotiated terms of our contract. That would be the same, but there would be a couple changes where it would move some dollars around. So the second column shows us that in plan year 2028 and 2029, we would no longer be paying Get Insured for the contact center, because we would have an internal contact center at that point. So it's $0 for those 2 years, but you still see the full amount would be paid for 2027. The next column to the right provides us with an overview of it's the print and mail services. So currently we are provided those by Get Insured, and that includes our outbound notices. It includes the inbound processing of, say, faxes and mailed in documents where they're scanned, uploaded, and attached to the proper account. So those costs have always kind of existed within our contact center costs. But because we would be retaining Get Insured for those services, but would no longer be paying them the contact center costs, in 2028 and 2029, those costs would shift over. They would still be the same amount that they've always been, but they would shift over to the technology contract. And then the next column to the right shows us what those additional new $500,000 costs per each year would look like. And then the final column on the right shows us what the total cost is across all 3 option years. So again, it's about $57.9 million is what we're requesting approval to move forward with exercising these option years. So I just want to stop there before we move over to the motion and see if there's any questions about any of the costs or how the contract works.
Go ahead, Colleen.
So this is helpful, and I just wanted to understand, because you were just sharing before, like hiring 7 additional positions, things like that. Do we know what the all-in cost is? Like today, I guess I'm trying to understand the staffing piece of this and the things that are being outside. Like ultimately the thought was that we would save money, right, with making this move and improve quality. So I'm trying to understand what the full picture of the costs are and what the addition of another $500,000 per year means to the overall budget to support the contact center.
Yeah, so in 2027, there's still the additional $10 to $11 million that Devin had mentioned on an earlier slide, which is kind of the transition cost. When it comes to 2028 and 2029 for our contact center cost, that would be between 18 and $19 million if current contact estimates stayed at what they are. With decreased enrollments, we're expecting those to drop. So what this does is it allows us cost containment so that we could adjust down rather than being stuck with a fixed price. We could lower if the volumes decrease and we have less CSRs that are needed or less services that were provided through the contact center. We now would have that containment authority, right? Like, so we would be able to actually adjust down our costs if necessary.
And I'll just add too that when we did walk through the call center total cost to implement, we did include a portion of that for integration costs, anticipating that we would need to integrate our call center system with the eligibility and enrollment platform. So this aligns what we thought we would need in the call center space kind of with the contract in order to actually perform that integration. So that wouldn't necessarily show up as an additional 500,000 for next year because we already included the call center bump up for next year. So it'd be within that, if that helps.
I'm sorry I missed it. So future years, Rob, like starting in 28 and beyond, it's $1 million, $2 million less than what it would have been had we continued to have support through the vendor.
I would say
By bringing
probably
it
so.
in-house.
If it was current volumes, if we kept it at that, it would probably be about 500 to so $500,000 to $750,000 less, just because the print and mail costs in the middle column are technically being transferred over. So instead of it being the 20.5 million, you'd have to account for that. It would be 19.3 that would be paying get insured, if not inclusive of the print and mail costs, if those were transferred over to technology.
Okay.
And also to add on that, so I think when we talked about this, we were saying like our goal is to kind of do a full replacement. So it would be similar number of CSRs, but much better. Our hope is to have much better quality just because we have closer oversight over the call center, which includes things like fraud prevention and identification, being able to have that direct line to our call center. So we've sort of modeled it at a similar, slightly lower cost than what we're paying now, but just to underscore, we have much more flexibility to make trade-offs, for example, on wait time. So if it's necessitated in the budget, we could make those adjustments to have a lower overall cost. I think we're kind of coming and trying to say, let's have a similar level of support that we have now, we would still save a little bit of money. And if we need to, if it's necessitated by our budget outlook or what we're seeing, we would have much more flexibility to make those adjustments as we go through.
Thanks. Other questions? Okay, Rob, I'll pitch it back to you.
I'll return it right to you. We got the motion for the vote.
So then we're looking for a motion to authorize the executive director to exercise the three renewal options allowed under the contract with Get Insured as presented. Do we have that motion?
This is Tia. I so move.
Tia moves. Do we have a second?
Second. Antoinette, I'll second.
I heard Antoinette. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Now I think we're turning it over to Chachi.
Thanks, Commissioner, and good afternoon. For the next hour, I will be walking through the slides for our consumer research and marketing plan. I'm kidding. I just want to briefly give a quick recap of some research that we did following open enrollment, and then tease a little bit of what we're working on looking ahead for open enrollment 27. So for our consumer research, we did that both through a vendor and in-house to better understand the uninsured, current enrollees, those that terminated coverage, those that came in and started an application but never fully enrolled, and then stakeholders, brokers, and assisters. We had two main goals, which was to figure out how we fared after the expiring tax credits, and then best ways to communicate with our key audiences, considering the shift in landscape and in eligibility. So on the next slide, just at from 30,000 feet, following EPTC, we found that 31% of enrollees say that the expiring tax credits influenced their decision during open enrollment. Compared to the uninsured, that was only 10%. We also learned that about a third of our enrollees say that they may drop coverage altogether if premiums continue to rise. I don't think that it's too much of a surprise, but the cost barriers dominated pretty much all of the responses from almost every single survey that we did. But some good news is that Pennie, by some distance, really is not assuming the responsibility for the expiration of the tax credits. And I think that that goes to us getting out ahead of it nice and early and letting folks know what was happening and why, and for them to be on the lookout come this coming open enrollment. And whenever I said that affordability and predictability is kind of the end game for our enrollees and uninsured, predictability is what am I going to pay? What am I looking at paying? So premiums plus deductibles plus copays, kind of understanding all of those costs together is really something that both enrollees and the uninsured are that want to know. Another great news is that I think that for about 2 years now, we've been talking about how our awareness amongst Pennsylvania's uninsured was sitting at 30%. We saw a big jump in that, almost 20%, which is great. I think that goes to a lot of the outreach that we've been doing, a lot of regionalizing our sister network, but also it was really in the zeitgeist with it being all over the news. This past open enrollment, that was something that we were also managing, with reacting to a lot of those press inquiries. But it was kind of everywhere with it being the reason the government was shut down. So there's still some work there to do as Pennie is still being identified as an insurance company. So I think we're gonna be able to message around that. But I know that my team is feeling very encouraged about that. Just having that connection from Pennie to insurance, we can keep the education going and understanding that Pennie's the marketplace, and also a strong net promoter score, really kind of showing some strong trust in the brand amongst enrollees, because that's really pertinent to the enrollees. And net promoter scores, those are kind of industry specific. So if you're talking about a university or maybe a sports team, you're looking at numbers, they consider numbers like 40 plus would be really good. But for other industries where maybe public opinion isn't that strong, having any sort of positive net promoter score is seen as good. So happy to see 24. I'd like to see that into the mid 20s if we can see some improvements. So going into the next slide.
Yeah, Chachi, don't feel too bad. I'm consistently asked if I sell insurance when I talk about what we do here.
Yep. Yeah, that is anecdotally it's what we hear challenge.
From.
Yeah. I had a contractor doing some work at the house, and he was like, "So what do you do?" And I said, "I work for Pennie." And he goes, "Oh, the insurance company." And so we have some work to do there, but I think just connecting it to insurance is a good first step.
Yeah.
And these are results of just from Pennie enrollees. So really where they value the most is that protection from unexpected medical bills. That is something that we're going to explore a little bit more for open enrollment. Um, uh, you know, they want Pennie to kind of focus our attention and time and efforts on trying to make coverage more affordable, and then communicate, clearly about affordability changes, eligibility changes. So they're really looking to us to to be the educator there and to keep them up to date on any changes, positive or negative. Um, they're looking for that help. I think that I've mentioned this a couple times on previous board meetings. Is they're looking for somebody to help them find the most affordable option, and I think that that can really lean into our free local help with our assisters and brokers, but also exploring some new self-help options at Pennie.com. And then the two big highlights there on those, that the third and the second to last bullet points, is that even with coverage, there is still that worry of unexpected medical bills, and 70% worry that they'll make the wrong choice and maybe regret it later in the year. So those are things that I think that we're going to be able to work on, both from a communication and outreach and advertising space, but also how we can explore it operationally too. And then on the next slide, more on the uninsured. So awareness jumped. Over half of the uninsured polled think that Pennie has their best interest in mind. So that trust factor is really encouraging. Still, though, regardless of tax credits, regardless of financial savings, regardless of, APTC, EPTC, they still believe that coverage has never been within reach. And I think that we can, that's quite a hurdle, but I think that we've got a lot of tactics in place that we can try to mitigate that. There was an interesting piece of the survey that jumped out to both us and the vendor around, over a third feel that if something happened, they would get into a payment plan. And some I think, in some ways, I think of that as like maybe a little bit of a no-brainer, but also it gives us an opportunity to kind of explain and show what actual healthcare costs could look like on a side-by-side comparison of having coverage and not having coverage, and what the potential medical debt could come from that. So those are things that we're exploring to help explain that through. And then other things about the value that we've talked through before. The trust level is the same amongst doctors and nurses as family and friends. So it's very interesting to see that, there's an opportunity there for finding some trusted partners on the provider side. And and again, that they're looking for that help to find the most affordable option and the highest quality option for them. So I think I've kind of talked a little bit to this already, but more education is needed on what Pennie is. We need to be more transparent in finding ways of being transparent with our costs. Lean really heavy into that value of protection from the unexpected. Seeing that a lot in the research, predominantly being from the enrollees saying that they value that the most, and from the uninsured saying that that's what they want. And then directing consumers to find local help, and clearly communicating. And we've kind of already done this over at Pennie.com. When you click find local help, we go to one more page, which clearly explains the difference between an assister and a broker. And then, like I mentioned, with the doctors and nurses and providers, trying to equip and educate them so that they can be trusted voices in those situations where somebody is most likely thinking and needing health insurance. So any questions there before I kind of jump into OEP early planning?
Chachi, I think my only question on healthcare costs, is it just general, like not unexpected bill from a balanced bill perspective, but an a realization of what having a deductible of $7, $8, $9,000 means?
I think the way that we took that those survey results was in case of illness or injury, what the cost would be from that unexpected circumstance.
Got it. Okay. Any other questions before he moves on? Okay. I guess you're good to keep moving.
Great. So just a couple more slides, we'll wrap it up. So just at a glance, some of the things that we need and some of our strategy. We need to be working on educating our current enrollees and the general public around the new OEP dates. Something that Colleen, Devin, and I were working through is that understanding our plan for advertising and our outreach plan, and avoiding like unnecessary costs or unnecessary advertising dollars. Just spending our advertising dollars wisely around the election cycle. Now that open enrollment will be 2 weeks into the election cycle, that we typically didn't really have to compete with it starting in November. And then prep our enrollees for what's coming next open enrollment for the pre-enrollment verification. And then strategy-wise, really kind of putting some finishing touches on year 2 of our 3-year plan to reach the uninsured. What we're looking at from a value and cost messaging piece, because remember, this past open enrollment, we were really leaning heavily into value, not so much of the cost side, but now that we've got a little bit more of some firmer ground to stand on, trying to fold some of those costs back in, and then set our primary targets for demographics. So into the next slide, I'm going to go kind of each one of those piece by piece. So starting to communicate to our enrollees in July, using lessons learned from last year, early and often, strong advertising, earned media, outbound communications push as we get closer to our final deadline. This is something that the team and I have been really talking about, is what we say around December 15th being the final deadline. Open enrollment ends December 15th. There will be no, if we have a little bit more context to provide it in an email or on website updates, there will be no January deadline. December 15th is your last chance, really hammering down that there's one singular deadline. Media buy wise, making sure that we're using the media or advertising tactics so that we're not in conflict with the election. But then once the election is over, then we really ramp up our ads there. And then as we did last year, really again strongly encourage our current enrollees to not sit out open enrollment. That it's not a passive thing. You've got to make some sort of action. Update your account, update your income, and keep that up to date throughout the year, so that next year when we're saying, hey, you've got to do something, that it's not out of left field, that it's not something that we've never asked before. So kind of this past open enrollment, this coming open enrollment, as more of training ground to get our enrollees used to taking action. And then my last slide, what we've learned from year 1 of our a plan to reach the uninsured was that the zip code targeting was difficult from the advertising perspective and from our outreach and a sister network perspective. So we're going to zoom up and do more county level targeting. I think that this bears a lot better with our enrollment data too, so we can see like where we're making gains. And then what we learned from our advertising that we talked about in February was that the engagement level with what I was calling the checkbox spot, where the actress was kind of saying, "Hey, here are the things that you need to do." The engagement of that spot wasn't that well. So I think that what we learned from that was people don't want to be spoken to. They want something that they can engage with. So from a creative standpoint, leaning into the value of coverage, talking a little bit more about those the protection from the unexpected, and then really starting to fold in transparent costs whenever we can, so that folks understand what their monthly payment could be looking at, and what having insurance versus going uninsured looks like. And then we've set a kind of a primary target demo for this open enrollment. I think this is going to be helpful for a variety of reasons, but it's going to be those that are under 40 and under 400% federal poverty level. So still eligible for tax credits. I think organically we can help try to drive costs down with a healthier risk pool there. And then also educating about Pennie earlier in life is going to let them know that it's an option if they need us later in life. And then this is just a broad enough target demo where it can work no matter if it's in an urban, rural, suburban setting. It kind of can go across most of our Pennie personas, and then we can also capture those young families. And then if the state affordability program is funded, we're already targeting this demo. This is again not to say that we're going to be leaving out other demos and other areas where definitely we'll have a statewide campaign, but when we're prioritizing dollars and messaging, that'll be our primary target. But I'll be able to talk really more at length about this at the August board meeting. So happy to take any questions.
Questions for Chachi? Not seeing any questions, Chachi. No?
Appreciate the
Okay.
time.
Appreciate it. Devin, we're at the end of the agenda. Was there anything else that you felt like you needed to bring up? We are 34 minutes early.
Yeah, no, I think we covered everything. Good on my end.
Okay. Well, thank you all for a productive meeting and look forward to talking to you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.